GrokTALK. Welcome back to GrokTALK. Brought to you by GrokTALK.com and the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. Please take some time to visit us at GrokTALK.org and GrokTALK.com and go to cnhd.org. You can listen to this program on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spreaker, TuneIn. We are also on Facebook and Twitter, and don't forget to check out Ustream or YouTube if you like the video version of our show. There you go. Yeah, that's us. No, Mike's. You got to check out the live stream now because Mike's doing stuff. You got to see it. Mike Rogers, of course, co-host Skip Murphy, and myself, Steve McDonald. And we've got a guest, and we are very happy to have him on the show. It's Phil Kerpen, the president of American Commitment. He's a nationally syndicated columnist, contributor to Fox News Opinion, chairman of the Internet Freedom Coalition, and author of the book Democracy Denied. I'd like to welcome Phil Kerpen to the show. Phil, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Great. Glad you could make it. Now, you guys do a lot over there at American Commitment. Why don't you give us a quick rundown of what goes on there?
We're really focused on the economic issues, mostly taxes, spending, healthcare, energy, and kind of regulation generally. And what we try to do is a little different than some of the other groups is we try to get you the information on what's happening in Washington with the facts and the research being solid, but everything is short and to the point. We don't put out like the long papers like think tanks, that kind of thing. Everything we put out is, short to the point. It might have a graph or a table. But we just try to get the information on the issues we work on out to you in a way that you can easily understand it and use it. So that's kind of our focus.
And one of the things you guys recently put out, I'm not sure it's recently, but I'm looking at it right now, Obama has delayed Obamacare 13 times, and you have a very nice, brief little graphic that shows the date and the thing that went on, and I think that's kind of what we want to focus on.
There's some other people have bigger counts. I kind of limited it to the major ones, and basically the ones since Obama said last year during the government shutdown that he would never allow any delays, and he would rather shut down the government, and Republicans were terrorists, and Ted Cruz was a maniac, and all this kind of stuff. And of course, what he really meant was he won't allow Republicans to delay any part of Obamacare, but he's very happy to do it himself, sort of arbitrarily and as it suits his political whim to try to get Democrats through this election. And in fact, that's what we've seen time after time after time. Most recently, this one where they said non-compliant plans that are actually prohibited by federal law under Obamacare, they can now be offered for 3 additional years. And even the media coverage of this, it was amazing. Even the media coverage of this was, President announces you can keep your plan for a couple more years to try to save Democratic senators in the 2014 election. So they didn't even offer any reason other than trying to rescue Democratic senators, which is not a good reason to suspend a law, even a very bad law like this one. You should do it the legitimate way through Congress.
Not only that, and Phil, this is Skip Murphy, and thanks again for coming on the show. When you listen to the bluster, and I put it exactly that way because it's not up to the president to be able to say these kinds of things as if they would then be as in a royal decree, but it's all up to the state regulators to go ahead and say, okay, do we really want to do this at all? And it's my impression, maybe you can help bolster the argument here, that most state regulators, when they hear this nonsense coming from our unilateral presidency, are saying, no, we're not going to do that because we don't have the time to react. The people we regulate have already moved in direction X. You can't demand that they move back in direction Y.
Yeah, it's a really good point. First of all, on your point about the president's assumed power to suspend laws by decree, that's been illegal even before the United States started. That's been illegal for another 100 years before that, going back to the English Bill of Rights, where Charles II had it explained to him that he did not have that power, and of course he was subsequently executed for attempting to assert that power. And so
now there's an idea.
That's where impeachment properly leads. Impeachment.
There's
for
a long
treason.
history of this being attempted. The assumed power to suspend laws without consent of Congress or Parliament before that. It's an ugly history. That is not a real power. That is an imagined and assumed power. But you're right. This change will actually help very few people. It is not designed to help actual American people who are losing their plans and would prefer to keep them for the very reason that you pointed out. You had all of these companies completely change their offerings to comply with the new rules. You have all of the state regulators who have, who've changed all their state rules and so on and so forth. And so there have actually been very few cases where people have been able to get back plans that have been canceled. But what the president is trying to do, and the reason it's been so transparent to anyone who's really paying attention, what he's trying to do is be able to say, oh, it wasn't our fault. Blame the state regulator for not bringing the plan back, or blame the insurance company for no longer offering it. And it's really about politics almost 100%, because you're right, very few people will get back the plans that they lost, but the president wants to be able to say, blame someone other than the Democrats that brought you this law. Even though, we should point out, guaranteed renewability was the law in this country since HIPAA in 1996. Since 1996, it has been illegal to deny someone a renewal on a plan. If they like that plan, they wanted to renew it. It's illegal to deny that. That's been the case since 1996 until Obamacare passed and led to all these mass forced cancellations. And so they're attempting to sort of pass the buck, pass the blame, say, hey, we said you could keep it. But, of course, it was way too late by the time they tried to change this. And so, those plans aren't coming back, and they shouldn't be able to get away with blaming someone else for that.
Yeah, so Phil, it's Mike Rogers, and a very good morning to you. So HIPAA did three really important things, aside from the privacy aspect, aside from what you mentioned, which is the guaranteed renewability. They also effectively gave you guaranteed portability by saying that if you had done the righteous thing and maintained coverage, they could not, if you moved jobs or changed companies, they could not impose a waiting period for a pre-existing condition, because you were not walking in off the street saying, my house is on fire, insure it. You were walking in off the street saying, I've done all the right things, please honor my commitment.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, I'm not going to say that the U.S. healthcare system was perfect before Obamacare, because it was not.
Far from it.
It could have been improved. I think we all know that, but the very limited, very isolated examples that the Democrats have hung this entire law on were, in many cases, didn't exist at all, and in others were extremely out of the ordinary. So when Nancy Pelosi goes out and says, we're not going back to when insurance companies could just cancel you for getting sick, and it's just like, what is she talking about? They could never do that.
There was no such thing.
There's a lot of dishonesty still now, misrepresentation about what went on and what was permitted before Obamacare, and the Democrats are still trying to use those same false scare stories to prevent the law from being reopened.
Phil, did you want to give us some examples of those? Because I'm sure our listeners are familiar, but a refresher is always nice.
Well, the one I just said is the biggest one I keep hearing. We're not going back to when they could cancel your policy because you got sick. Well, I mean, that was never allowed. That never happened. They could cancel your policy if you lied on the application, didn't disclose a health condition that they asked about, but that's a little different than saying they could cancel it for when you get sick. And the idea that we had these huge numbers of people falling through the cracks, it's really not true. Most of the uninsured numbers that you saw in those reports that came from the Census Bureau year after year, those were people who were short-term uninsured because they were between jobs or something like that, and would become insured again within a year, or a lot of them were eligible for government programs and just hadn't signed up. And so the numbers are very deceptive, and most of the scare stories that you hear that supposedly went on, they're not true. That's why it's been so hard for them to come up with actual human beings with real names and real stories, and they just kind of rely on these talking points.
My son was one of those young invincibles. He came home after doing a tour in Iraq, got out of the U.S. Marines, and, I'm quite familiar with the numbers that were being bandied about before Obamacare was passed, where, half of them were illegal aliens. A lot of them, as you said, were eligible for state-sponsored care and didn't bother. And then there were a whole bunch of people that Pelosi and Obama now call free riders. Well, he didn't feel that he wanted to pay for medical insurance. He preferred to buy a Hartley. And I kept telling him, in a small modicum of the whole problem here, it's like, fine, wear a helmet. But, Dad, I don't want to wear a helmet. Here in New Hampshire, I don't have to wear a helmet. fine. If you go down and you hit your head on a curbing, I'm not going to take care of you. Decisions have consequences. And I think what we've seen in a lot of the cases since 1986, when I think it was LADA that was, I think that's the right acronym, where they basically told the hospitals, you will take anybody who comes in through your door.
It's called EMTALA.
EMTALA, okay. Thank you. I knew I was misremembering it. But basically, here's the next biggest distortion of the healthcare scene. You have to give charity in order to be in business. And those are the kinds of people who became the free riders. And you hear the Nancy Pelosi's and the Obama saying, we got to get rid of the free riders. They're supposed to, they're stealing from all of us. Well, it was government who made that problem in the first place. So we have government trying to solve a problem the government made that's trying to solve a problem the government made probably 5 or 6 different times in a row here. And they've done it with Obamacare. Well, how do we get them to stop this nonsense? How do we get these supposedly smart people to understand you're not that smart?
Well, I other than beating them in elections, I don't know if there's anything else to listen to, honestly. I mean, because we tried to tell them throughout when they're passing it and afterwards and everything. They don't. As long as they still have the job, they figure they're doing something right. Which I guess is appealing to a sufficient number of liberals, and I guess in a sense they are doing that. But I'll tell you, Obamacare is actually going to make emergency room overcrowding significantly worse through the Medicaid.
I was just going to go there, but have at it.
And there's a myth that there are a lot of uninsured people in emergency rooms. There are actually relatively few uninsured people in emergency rooms because if you're uninsured and you go to an emergency room, you're going to get a huge bill. And if you're not able to pay that bill, you're going to have a lot of financial difficulties as a consequence of that. So if you're uninsured, you probably don't go to an emergency room unless you have a very, very serious situation where you're willing to deal with the financial consequences of that. On the other hand, if you are on Medicaid and you pay nothing when you go to the insurance room because taxpayers pay all of it, well, you really have no reason not to go there, and especially because the structure of Medicaid is so poor in terms of the reimbursement rates for doctors. They're so low that very few primary care doctors take Medicaid. And so a lot of people, even if they wanted to do the right thing and go to a doctor, Medicaid patients, they can't find one. And so they end up going to emergency rooms. And in states that have done Medicaid expansion in the past, and the biggest one that's been the most studied was in Oregon, which did it a few years ago, we've actually seen emergency room usage go up more than 40% among the newly insured population. And so as states expand Medicaid under Obamacare, I think we're going to see a lot more people going to emergency rooms, both for legitimate emergency conditions and otherwise. And of course, 100% of that cost falls on taxpayers.
Yeah, it's actually worse than that, isn't it, Phil? First of all, as you correctly pointed out, Medicaid has such a poor selection of doctors that most patients, rather than struggle with getting a doctor, will just wait till it gets bad enough and go to the emergency room. That, plus the fact that the reimbursement is so low and the hospital has the incentive to move them along at the lowest possible cost and get them out again, is why the outcomes and indeed death rates for Medicaid patients exceeds all others, including the uninsured, which is quite remarkable. But why I say it's really worse than that is this. Is it not the case in either the healthcare law or in the way most states are implementing Medicaid expansion that the reimbursements that hospitals got for those so-called emergency room free riders is in fact now being withdrawn because they're supposed to be all covered under Obamacare because it's sunshine and lollipops? What that means is the hospitals are taking more emergency room patients for less reimbursement, and that spells bankrupt hospitals. Am I missing something?
No, you're right. Those are called the DISH payments, the disproportionate share payments. Those are being slashed as part of Obamacare. The hospitals are being squeezed in that respect. Now, the hospitals, for their part, they've got a number of provisions in the law that they like and that they push for, which is why they supported it. Principally, there's something called the Accountable Care Organization that they've got incentives for, and the hospitals are buying up a lot of medical practices. So, it's not totally clear that the law nets out to a loss for hospitals. If it does, that would be quite ironic since they were one of the major supporters of it. But you are right that they are losing out on those dish payments, and whether they can make them up through the Medicaid expansion is unclear. But I'll tell you, the places where they're freaking out, which I think serves them right, are the states that are not doing the Medicaid expansion, because they're going to get their cuts, but they're not going to get the big increase that they were expecting. And so that's one of the implications of that Supreme Court case that made the Medicaid expansion optional, is that in a lot of states it's not working out as planned for the hospitals that supported the law.
All right, Phil, we're going to take a 60-second break, and just hang on the line there. We'll be right back. We're talking to Phil Kerpen with American Commitment. My name's Steve McDonald. I'm here with Mike Rogers and Skip Murphy, and we'll be right back.
This is the Coalition of New Hampshire Taxpayers. We're located at 8 North Main in Concord, New Hampshire. This is a repository for all things conservative and municipal. So if you have a problem in your town, your school, your budget committee, the right to know law, and now at the top of our list is voter fraud. You have a tip for us, some information for us, you want to join or help us out, cnht.org.
Senator Jeanne Shaheen said, if you like your current health plan, you can keep it. That's not true, Senator. 22,000 New Hampshire citizens have been kicked off their insurance plans. Hospitals in Rochester, Concord, and Portsmouth, they aren't allowed to provide care under the exchange. Senator, you were wrong in your comments. You should apologize for your misleading remarks. I'm calling Senator Shaheen at 750-3004 and telling her I want my doctor back. You should too.
Paid for by saberpac.org, not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee.
GrokTALK.
All right, we're back, and you can hear Phil's family in the background. He warned me that we might have children on the show.
That's fine.
My wife is taking my oldest out right now, so I've got the 1.5-year-old twins here, and one of them just started yelling. So.
Oh, that's fine. We like families. So as long as you don't have to need to leave to go address that, that's fine.
Well, I'm gonna pick her up and see if that.
Okay, that's fine. We have another guest.
Yeah.
we have an apprentice freedom fighter.
That's
Welcome.
right. Welcome. Yep, absolutely. Aww.
He's crying about Democrat acts of legislation.
There you go.
Maybe.
Somebody just told him what he's going to owe.
Let me just step back in the other room.
Yep, sure.
All right. I like that ad you guys just ran, by the way. Very direct and to the point on the you can keep it.
Yeah, Saber PAC was created by a Stratford County chairman and some of his other members in his committee as a separate PAC, not associated with the Republican GOP state committee. But yeah, it's very, very simple and direct, and it just states it like it is.
Phil, I want to change directions here because I have read your book, Democracy Denied, and in a large part of the book you talk about Americans being strangled by government regulation. And there was one thing that you really went after a lot, and it really tried to put a spotlight on, which was the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S, for those listeners who aren't familiar with it. And effectively it was supposed to be putting the burden on Congress to oversee regulations being applied by the executive branch that were too costly, too binding, and too freedom-crushing. Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really important piece of legislation. We've now passed it in the House, 2 Congresses in a row, last Congress and this Congress. We've been unable to get any votes in the Senate, as you might expect, with Harry Reid and Jeanne Shaheen and the rest of them blocking any good idea over there. But I hope that if we get a Republican Senate, this will be something we can actually pass and put on the President's desk, and I hope he would sign it, although this President probably not. But this is a bill that stands for Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act. And the idea behind it is that instead of allowing Congress to just write these broad, vague laws that stand for decades while bureaucrats and regulators make up all the rules and regulations and all the real details that control our lives, any economically significant regulation really should go through Congress, should go through our elected representatives, and they should take political responsibility for it by voting up or down before it takes effect. And so instead of having this huge administrative state that more or less does whatever it wants within these broad, vague statutes, and I would say sometimes not even within them, as we've seen lately on Obamacare, just sort of going off on their own, the agencies would basically now propose regulations instead of implementing them themselves, and they would send them back to Congress for a vote up or down, and they would only take effect if they passed the House and Senate and were signed by the President. And, I have no illusions that Congress would never do anything stupid. They do stupid things all the time. But the big benefit of making Congress vote on all these rules and regulations before they take effect is we would know exactly who to blame for them. And when they're bad, we'd know exactly who voted for them and who didn't. And they wouldn't be able to play this game that they play now where they pass a 2,000-page, vague, crazy law, and then when it doesn't go well, they say, oh, no, it was the bureaucrat, I didn't support this rule, I wouldn't have done it that way. And they do that dance. And so I think this is a very important measure to bring accountability back to the regulatory process and really to make the job of Congress actually matter in the way that it's supposed to make them take seriously the responsibility of writing legislation. And there's an amazing human interest story behind this bill, which I tell in the book, and I've written it a few other places also. You can find, if you do a web search for my name and Reigns or what have you. But there was a guy named Lloyd Rogers, amazing guy, a Navy veteran, had worked for Cincinnati Bell for 30 or 40 years as an engineer, and he lived in Alexandria, Kentucky, northern Kentucky, which is part of a consolidated sewer district across 3 counties there, and that district was forced by the federal EPA to spend about $1 billion on runoff wastewater management. That they had to double their water bills as a consequence of that. And this guy went to his congressman, Jeff Davis. He's since retired, but he went to his congressman and he said, look, how can the EPA double my water bill? You're my congressman. Don't you have to vote on that? How does the EPA have the power to double my water bill without a vote of Congress? And his congressman said, you know what, they shouldn't have that power. And that's what led to the bill. And as I said, it has passed the House now 2 Congresses in a row, and we're hoping we can keep moving it forward. And this is, I did get every presidential candidate last time on the Republican side told me they would have signed the bill if it had passed. And so a lot of people say no president's going to reduce presidential power. They would never sign something like that. But I think there's a growing awareness that our process has a problem. And so I think it is something we could potentially pass. Probably not all the way through to a presidential signature until after the next presidential election, given how Obama's been governing, but I think it's something that is, in fact, doable.
It points out 2 different problems. One, we keep sliding towards the end state of the progressive movement, which is a technocratic administrative state where they make all the rules, and their goal is to make an efficient society. And the idea of liberty and freedom never arises in that mindset. But it also points out that Congress itself has been giving away more and more of its power, not willing to make the hard decisions, where certainly the EPA has taken what it was given and running with it. But you look at the Obamacare law itself, where it says the secretary shall, hundreds of times. Is it a case where Congress critters only want the title? They want to be seen as somebody versus actually doing the hard work? Because in my eye, as a constitutional conservative, I'm looking at this saying, guys, the executive branch isn't supposed to be making these rules and these laws. They should just be executing what Congress tells them to do.
I think they like the glory and the attention and the power and all this kind of business. They like the title. And frankly, they like the upside on those rare occasions where these things actually work out or people are actually happy with these government programs and laws and so forth. But they don't want to deal with all of the detailed negative consequences and all of the problems that happen when you try to control people's lives. And so they pass these broad, vague laws, and they delegate as much authority as possible. And when things go well, they can say, I did that for you, I gave that to you, vote for me, praise me, name things after me. And when they go badly, they can say, oh yeah, the bureaucrats got that part of it wrong, I'm going to work with them, that was a bad. So they can avoid responsibility, and it's very comfortable for them to pass these laws and to claim their wonderful good intentions and then to kind of wash their hands of the actual implementation, which never quite goes as planned. And so I think you're absolutely right that it makes sense if your mindset is, which the liberal mindset is, that people don't know how to run their lives, they don't know how to make decisions for themselves, they need to be told and controlled by people who are better than they are, the elites, the university professors, the technocrats, the bureaucrats, and so on and so forth. this is what they genuinely believe, and so these members of Congress, these liberal Democrats, they think, well, let me put the experts in charge of this. I'll pass a law that just puts the experts in charge, and everyone will be better off. And so they really, I think it's two things. I think they enjoy kind of the lack of accountability, and sort of the way they can claim the upside and avoid the downside on a lot of these laws. But they also genuinely do believe that the experts are better at making decisions for us than we are for ourselves. So they think they're helping us when they do that.
Which means that 70% of Republicans are joined with 100% of Democrats to believe that the progressive state is the answer. What I was going to say, especially in riffing off of Skip's point about the efficient management of the country, is that central top-down government is never going to run the country efficiently, because efficiency requires voluntary cooperation and capitalism, and the attempt by government to concentrate all knowledge and all power inevitably result in extremely inefficient administration.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I thought that von Mises disproved the idea of a planned society when he explicated the knowledge problem 100 years ago, and yet here we are, and there's some people who just refuse to learn. They refuse to not only do they refuse to learn that lesson from the theoretical work, but they ignore a century of really quite tragic empirical evidence that central economic planning not only fails but leads to authoritarianism. And so there's something very remarkable going on. I mean, we've got there's this kid, Jesse Meyerson, writes for Rolling Stone now, who says we need full communism, and he's got all these liberals kind of cheering him on. So we've got this sort of totally ahistorical group of younger liberals that have zero appreciation for what these ideas actually mean and what their consequences actually are. And it's a little bit frightening, because it means we may need to learn this lesson again the very hard way of going down this path to the point that it causes very severe pain.
Phil, I got to jump in because we're almost out of time. Could you give us some contact information where people can reach you? And that'll be it for us.
Yeah, AmericanCommitment.org is the website, and all our stuff is on there. And I'm on Twitter. It's my last name, @Kirpin. I tweet a lot if folks are interested in that.
All right, well, Phil Kirpin, president of American Commitment, columnist, author, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us at GrokTALK.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
All right, thanks a lot. Have a great weekend. All right, that was Phil Kirpin. My name's Steve McDonald. I'm here with Skip Murphy and Mike Rogers, and we will be back in about three and a half minutes to talk to you a little bit more. Mike's sharing the calendar. Ooh, look at that. It looks really good on the iPad, by the way. Always looking for new ways to innovate and make the program run better. That's us. That's GrokTALK. We'll be right back.
GrokTALK.
Turned off or tuned out recently? Can't believe what you see or hear these days? We have the show for you. It's all about taking control through understanding what's happening. Dr. Julianne Cooper, founder and president of Liberty Harbor Academy, hosts Carpe Diem, New Hampshire's first culture and education show on WSMN Radio 1590. Longtime history professor, entrepreneur, and cultural commentator Dr. Cooper will discuss what's happening in and to American culture and education. From pop culture to higher education, Dr. Cooper will help you make sense of the world. So, seize the day. Listen to Carpe Diem with Dr. Cooper every Tuesday from 11 to noon.
Steve McDonald here. Molly Shaheen, Senator Jean Shaheen's daughter, has a very expensive LA apartment where she lives and works, but for some strange reason, she voted here in New Hampshire. Elena Biden, niece to the man a heartbeat away from the presidency, well, she never lived in New Hampshire at all, and she voted here and went back home. New Hampshire Democrat Emma Roos invited her adult children to leave their homes in Virginia, Washington, D.C. to claim they lived in New Hampshire to vote last November, and they went back home. New Hampshire State Senator Martha Fuller Clark, vice chair of the New Hampshire Democrat State Party, she had a whole bunch of people who aren't from here living in her home, including a paid congressional staffer and an ACLU lawyer from Arkansas. They don't live here. They all claim to be claiming to live here just so they can vote here and then leave. That's not all the Democrats who showed up to steal your votes and then leave, but that'll get you started. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Rock, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
GrokTALK is 2 hours of news and opinion you could only get from GraniteRock.com. But don't limit yourself to GrokTALK. Check us out at GraniteRock.com. Follow us on Facebook or Twitter by searching Granite Grok.
GrokTALK.